Okay, so we're going to move on to our second plenary speaker, and our second plenary speaker this morning is Oonagh Buckley. So Oonagh is the Secretary General of the Department of Environment, Climate and Communication. She's had various roles. She's worked as the Interim Chair of An Bord Pleona. She's worked in the Department of Justice. She was previously the Director General of the Workplace Relations Commission and a whole series of other roles. She's a graduate of UCC, College of Europe, Belgium and Poland, and the University of London, and she was called to the bar in 1996. So she's lots of qualifications, but we're here this morning just to hear from her about what she thinks in relation to her title, which is Co-Designing Pathways to a Carbon Neutral Ireland, putting democratic legitimacy at the heart of climate policy. Thank you, Oonagh.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much, John, and to your colleague, Professor Way, for the invitation. What I heard, I was wondering about the Canavan link, but what I think I heard was that Liz is the Mycroft to your Sherlock. So it was a very great privilege to speak today at this important conference on public engagement for better policy. And it's a topic that's incredibly close to my heart. This issue of democratic legitimacy is incredibly important for those of us those civil servants in my department and across government who have to deliver the climate action agenda. We cannot do it unless we bring the vast majority of the population with us. We will never bring everybody, but we have to bring the majority. And the question of democratic legitimacy of what we do is front and centre of my concerns about making sure that we can deliver on what is one of the overriding, if not the overriding issue of our age. And placing citizens at the centre of policy is really central to our mission, especially, as I say, on climate action. And European climate law, as well as setting us these incredibly challenging targets to achieve, commits us to achieving this in a socially fair and cost-efficient manner. Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, it's you've heard my career, and I often say jokingly I bring a depth of experience to this role, but not a height of experience. So anyway, not only are we committed under European law to deliver on this, we're also committed under the Programme for Government, which reaffirmed the agenda around what we have to achieve in terms of climate targets. And today I want to talk to you about the various ways my department is supporting public engagement and the provision of evidence to help us design and critically deliver better policy. Now, I'm going to touch on 4 key areas. The firstly is public consultations and how we're now doing them, particularly around offshore wind development. I want to talk you through that. I want to talk to you about the National Dialogue on Climate Action. I want to talk to you about the Just Transition Commission. And finally, I want to talk to you about the work we're doing on the key issue of energy affordability, which is very live and recent. And finally, I want to just touch on our research and innovation programme, which is very central to, obviously, to this university and to our third level institutions. So we always start by recognising that the transition to a climate neutral economy by 2050 is incredibly challenging, and it will require fundamental changes in our society and our economy and what we do, how we work, how we travel, how we engage, how we consume food, everything. And as the government department responsible for leading this transition, although I keep on repeating it is a whole of government effort, it is crucial that we engage with all members of society in the co-design of this transition. As I say, we must bring the majority with us. And this commitment to democratic legitimacy is reflected in our departmental strategy, where we set out to be a recognised leader in climate action. So very specifically, what have we done recently to try and make that very real? So some of you may have seen in the recent past that we've changed our approach towards how we plan to do offshore wind developments. What we call phase 1 was a developer-led approach. So developers decided on sites, they went off and consulted, they're gone for planning permission. So it's what you might all recognise as being how we've done development since 1963 and the passage of the old Planning and Development Act. But last year we changed our approach. Ireland changed its approach. And we moved from developer-led to plan-led. Right? So in other words, the government now says, this is where you can develop. My department led on the public consultations to deliver that first DMAP off the southwest coast. And to deliver it, the team did the following. And I hope you'll forgive me, but I got the leader of that team to send me what he did. And I'm going to bore you slightly by reading it all out. But the most boring bit is the start. The draft South Coast Designated Maritime Area Plan for Offshore Renewable Energy, the SCDMAP, there's always an acronym in DEC, the Strategic Environmental Assessment, SEA, Environmental Report, the Natura Impact Assessment, NIS, and additional background reports, including this SCDMAP Maritime Area Identification Report and the SCDMAP Regional Economic Impact Report, were published on 3rd of May 2024 and subject to a statutory 6-week public consultation that concluded on the 14th of June 2024. Okay? So notice we threw an awful lot of information at people and let them read it themselves and come back to us if they wanted to. That would have been the classic style of public consultation. Happily, we did not just do that. So again, this period of consultation also included 14 in-person public events along the South Coast, 3 webinars, and a multitude of additional targeted stakeholder meetings across all societal pillars, environmental, industry, and social. For completeness, a further period of public consultation took place during August 2024, great timing, in respect of the environmental data log, clarifying the full extent of environmental data that informed the preparation of the draft SCDMAP. A total of 343 submissions were received during the statutory consultations in June, up to June, and in August 2024, there was 129 written submissions and 214 survey responses where we actually surveyed people in person. The statutory consultation was preceded by a 9.5-week period of non-statutory public engagement during 1 August to 6 October 2023, which took place following the publication of a proposal. That was in summer 2023. This period of non-statutory consultation included 8 in-person events, 2 webinars, and further meetings with targeted stakeholders, and over 1,000 submissions were received as part of the non-statutory consultation. So we did a huge amount of on-the-ground work. We put boots on the ground, effectively. It was incredibly resource-intensive. There are still people who are recovering from the experience of meeting South Coast fishermen. But what was the result? Well, the result was the draft EMAP was laid before both houses of the Oireachtas in September 2024. A debate was held in both houses and a unanimous vote taken on a resolution to approve the draft plan. But in both houses, it was then adopted by government in 2024 and became a statutory spatial plan with the same legal obligations as the National Planning Framework. What was the result for the people we consulted? It was much less confusing for them. So instead of having lots of different developers come in with lots of shiny proposals and absolutely ginormous wind turbines, and these offshore wind turbines are enormous, right? They had one group of people they were dealing with who were from the government, right? And I know sometimes being consulted by the government can be the worst thing in the world, but it made it much less confusing for them. Plus, the range of people we had present were people who were familiar to them in many respects. For example, we had a fisheries specialist who has been engaged with this industry his entire career. He makes even me feel I could fish, right? And I can't. So we had people who could talk the language of the people they were talking to and engage with them throughout. Now, I'm not saying we didn't make mistakes. There were some criticisms of our initial DMAP that included some important oyster fishing grounds, but then in the iteration and the repeat of it, we were able to exclude that work. There's an awful lot of ocean out there, so we were able to insist that we dealt with. Or, if it had come to it and we knew we needed to interfere with the lifestyle or the economic wishes of the people we were dealing with, at least we knew the group we had to target for the just transition arrangements that were to come. We were able to encompass conservation concerns in particular. In the absence of marine protected areas, and we are committed, and I'm about to acquire the role there, we have to designate 30% of our sea area by 2030 for conservation areas, but it's not done yet. But in the absence of that, we were able to accommodate those conservation needs and conservation areas and stay away from them in terms of where we need to go on the DMAP. So we've now de-risked it for the environment and for the developers, because we're going to be asking major companies that can invest their billions around the world, we're going to be able to say to them, we've actually taken an awful lot of the planning and conservation risk out of this for you. And the phase 1, unfortunately, are running into that planning and conservation risk as we speak. So we got local political acceptance, and then we got national political acceptance. And that was and really, really important to us. And critically, we avoided that ultimate negative feedback mechanism. There was no judicial review. Really, really important. Now, we've seen, as we've improved some of our engagements, some of our preliminary engagements across other key bits of infrastructure, particularly in my head, I have the Celtic interconnector, where EirGrid did a huge amount of preliminary engagement, and where again, that went through the normal planning system without a single objection. Again, that negative feedback loop, but it's an important one. We as a nation appear to be much keener on stuff that goes underground, by the way, I should say that to you, but anyway, that's a different problem. So it de-risks our implementation in the phrase, that excellent presentation that Sally gave. It de-risks what we have to do in terms of delivery, but it takes an awful lot of resources and it takes an awful lot of work. So much so that when my team came into me a few months ago with their shiny new idea that we would do a national offshore wind DMAP, so we would encompass all areas around the coast and do these designated areas, and I said, really guys, do you have enough people to consult nationally on this? And they have assured me that they've taken all the lessons from the South Coast DMAP and they will be able to do that consultation. And what we know is that that gives a better outcome for the people who will be affected by this, even if what's affecting them is only the views out to sea. So, but it's really, really important as a country for this planet that we deliver this offshore wind. So if what we need to do is put huge resources in the front end, in the consultation piece and the design of it, well, that's what we have to do. And it very much speaks into the role and things that we were talking about here today, that this is about, in some respects, trying to decide what the best route to design your policy proposal is and how to get that public acceptance into it. So just to move on then to the other ways, and we're trying to build this democratic legitimacy about our work. Within our climate action plan, we have a specific chapter to outlining our approach to citizen engagement, and that's delivered through the National Dialogue on Climate Action. So the ambition of the National Dialogue is to engage, enable and empower everyone to take climate action in a way that is inclusive, fair and accessible. It's delivered across 3 interrelated pillars: national stakeholder engagement, community empowerment and social and behavioural research, and I know a lot of our third level institutions are involved in that latter. Our key achievements over the past 4 years have captured the views of over 16,000 people through what we call the annual climate conversations. We've obviously engaged in a 2-way dialogue with thousands of stakeholders through stakeholder forum events, the most recent one of which was in Cork, and I know there are a couple of people here who were at that. We've captured recommendations on climate policy of hundreds of young people between the ages of 12 and 24, a very difficult group to access in many respects, except young people who are engaged in climate, by God, they're really engaged. You can't shut them up, really, actually. And that's through the National Youth Assembly on Climate. We've proactively engaged with populations vulnerable to the transition to carbon neutrality through a 2-way dialogue supported by workshops and focus groups, and working then with leading social and behavioural researchers to help us design evidence-informed policies. Now, insights from this programme tell us most people are concerned about climate change. They believe it will affect them and the next generation, and they want to act. However, many of them think it won't affect them much in Ireland. It'll mostly affect people outside of Ireland, and they're actually not wrong. In some respects, we're quite blessed in this country. And of course, climate change is, and in my speech here it says, is not always the most important issue facing people who are dealing with healthcare, inflation, cost of food and all that. I would say is not only not always, it is never the most important issue facing people in this country if they're dealing with getting kids to school, getting to work, paying for food, paying for all this, dealing with elderly parents and all that other stuff, that it is far more urgent than the more important overarching things. So we have to bring people along us in that journey in circumstances where this is not the most important thing to them. We also know that they lack the resources sometimes and the knowledge to make the changes that we need them to make around their behaviours. And so this reinforces the view that any transition to carbon neutrality must be carried out in a way that respects their differences. We can do this best by identifying the different barriers to climate action people experience across a range of areas and designing our policies in a way that support them so we can be inclusive and fair, so that everybody plays a part, but it's appropriate to the circumstances they find themselves in. And everybody must be encouraged to take part, but in the simplest way possible. And we published a study from the ESRI last December, which, if you're interested, is available on the ESRI website, which was about how to encourage collective climate action. That study supported the idea that we need to move away from talking about what the government must do and what individuals must do, and start to teach climate action as a collective action. In other words, we've realised that if people can see that other people in their community are also taking action, they feel more empowered to work with their fellow community to do it. It's easier if you can see, just to take a simple example, if the person opposite from you in your housing estate puts up solar panels, you might go over and talk to them about what it took and what, and the fact that they're doing it might encourage you to do it. That's a very simple example, but we need to widen those examples across a whole range of things. And so now we're starting to engage very much with communities to try and see what's working in their community and what might work there, and to see whether it'll work in other places, but to try and make it as bespoke as possible to each individual community. And this is a very big change to our approach to engagement. In many ways, we're leading out on this. It's quite experimental, but I think that as a country, we have shown that when we come together as communities during things like COVID and so forth, working together, we can deliver quite a lot. And actually, people feel better when they're working with each other and with their neighbours to deliver on things. So it is a way we think will be much more impactful at the local level in trying to design what we need to do. We launched a programme in 2024, Climate Actions Work, and that started by identifying a number and variety of people and communities taking action and making changes across the country, as well as what they had identified as the problem they needed to face. We've heard that while funding is often part of the picture, it's not the whole part of the picture. And in fact, what tended to be the problems that people faced was getting visibility around their work, recruiting more people to do it, finding ways to share knowledge and success stories and to help people learn from each other, and finding ways to collaborate with each other and coordinate their actions. And so we've, since 2024, we have, through that programme, delivered the first map of community climate action in Ireland. We've delivered training to over 300 government, stakeholder and community leaders working in communications and engagement strategy. And we have the first community engagement fund, which is now supporting 96 projects and 2,000 volunteers across 23 countries to reach 30,000 new people. And we've established sustainable structures for community climate action through climate action hubs. And in this way, we respect the fact that some people will take on climate actions and want to do more, while other people are content to let it happen, but just have other priorities, have other things to do, or just aren't interested. So our programmes are set up to those already proactively taking climate action, but are trying to make it easier and more accessible to everybody else. And so some things this has done: rolling out e-bike schemes, creating biodiversity trails, village renewals, promoting action awareness through local sports clubs, energy mehel projects, and establishing sustainable hubs that can endure over time at the community level. And in reality, we're just trying to facilitate people in Ireland, in communities, to take actions in their own communities. Critically, of course, and I keep on emphasising this, this has to be done in a way that is fair and just to all communities, and this is where the work of the Just Transition Commission is so important. We established the Independent Just Transition Commission in 2024. It's supported by the Programme for Government. It has a remit to hold government to account and to listen to communities, address their concerns and ensure they benefit from the green transition. It's chaired by Ali Sheridan, a very powerful woman, and is representative of the 5 pillars of social dialogue. So in some respects, this is back into a different form of consultation, but one that is equally respected, where, if you like, there are nominees from various areas. It is to give government impartial, strategic and evidence-based advice to inform policy making related to the just transition, and to be a public voice leading in developing a shared understanding and identifying the challenges, solutions and opportunities for Ireland. We know that this transition will represent a social, cultural and economic challenge for many households and businesses, and some more than others, whether due to location, to the industry they're currently part of, or to their socio-economic circumstances. They may well suffer some form of loss from this. And we need to try and work with them to ensure that we can bring them on this journey too, and that they don't become the voice, if you like, that turns the majority opinion against climate change, because that could so easily happen. At the centre of all of this, though, is something that I think is a nexus for a lot of this work, which is around energy affordability, and specifically how we heat homes and poorer homes. The programme for government acknowledges the pressure which increased energy costs places on households and businesses, and seeks to lower prices while accelerating the pace of renewable deployment. And some of you here may be familiar with the energy trilemma. There is a dilemma or trilemma in energy policy. It is hard to have secure energy supplies, to decarbonise those energy supplies, and to have those energy supplies affordable at the same time. You can have two of those three, but it's hard to have all three. And oftentimes within the trilemma, attention moves around which of the three we're focusing on. So a couple of years ago, it was very much security of supply. Obviously in the last couple of years, under the last minister, it was very much around the decarbonisation agenda. Under this government, and particularly under the EU, attention has switched very firmly onto affordability and I suppose its counterpart for businesses' competitiveness. So there's a huge challenge facing us now to try and manage the question of affordability. We're establishing a task force on energy affordability. So we have task forces on delivering offshore wind. We have task forces about delivering onshore renewables. The bit that was missing was making sure that we had a task force looking at how do we try and ensure this is as affordable as possible while we go through this transition to renewable energy. I'm actually going to chair the preparatory meeting of this task force this week, and the Minister will have the first meeting of it in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to try and identify policy options to improve energy affordability while delivering key renewable commitments and protecting, as I say, security of supply and economic stability. And what we want to try and do is facilitate collaboration between government departments and then related stakeholders to identify, assess and implement measures that will enhance energy affordability for households and businesses. We're going to try and prepare an interim plan for short-term measures which will support customers in preparation for Budget 2026 and NDP negotiations. And then over the long term, we want to try and identify cost drivers and make recommendations for structural reforms which can be made into the medium to long term, and taking into consideration recommendations arising at EU level in the Energy Affordability Action Plan. Nestled within this is our poverty work, because there are many people in this country who are energy poverty poor. And just to give you a couple of stats, after all the energy credits that have been done in the last few years, about 10% of consumers, or so that's households and businesses, are in arrears on electricity. However, about 25% are in arrears on their gas bills. So that's a huge proportion of people who are in arrears on gas. And you'll notice that none of our energy credits went into gas bills because only a smaller proportion of people use gas. Whereas to hit the maximum number of people during the cost of living crisis, we put money directly into electricity bills, because as we've all discovered, particularly after Storm Éowyn, absolutely everybody is reliant on electricity. So we have very high costs of energy for households. Ultimately, what will be best for government is to continue to make investments in retrofitting homes so people can live in warmer homes where they use less expensive electricity, particularly gas or fossil fuel-based energy, to warm their homes. So there's a huge push, and I'm currently engaged in the hand-to-hand combat behind doors that is the negotiations about our next National Development Plan. And our focus is very much on retrofit, is residential retrofit, and how do we make sure that we can deliver enough warm homes for people. What I've often said to people is some aspects of the climate change agenda, you can't argue with them, right? Who doesn't want to live in a warmer home? More particularly, who doesn't want their parents to live in a warmer home? Who doesn't want to waste less money by wasting less food? Actually, the third most impactful thing we can do, each individual of us, is just simply to put less good food into the bin, right? Something, every time I do it, I feel guilty, and I still do it. And the third thing we can do to change how our personal global greenhouse gas emissions is to change how we move around the island. Not even cancel your foreign holiday to warmer parts, which we all need on a day like today, but actually just to to walk and cycle more, to take more public transport. And if you're driving, and everybody drives in this country, try and transfer your driving onto an electric mode of travel. That's what we as citizens can do most to change our personal greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of that is good for ourselves and good because if we move on to electric travel, fewer of us will die from lung complaints. So there are very, very many good things in the transition to climate action. The trouble is trying to get that across to the majority of people. Finally, I just want to mention research and innovation, given I'm in a third-level institution and I know that's so close to people's hearts. My department launched its first research and innovation strategy in May 2024. It commits us to harnessing research to its full potential to drive innovation, inform policy development, policy evaluation and implementation across our entire brief. We currently invest about 50 million actually in research annually. We're one of the top government departments in doing that research, and it's an incredibly important part of how we do our policy. We are a data-driven department. So in conclusion, and I'm sure you're delighted to hear about what is always, unfortunately, a slightly despondent talk, but one hopefully that shows that we are working very, very hard across our brief to try and deliver. We want our work to have democratic legitimacy, and we want our work to have broad acceptance. Because unless we can bring the majority of the people living in this island with us, it won't work and we won't be able to do it. So we actively work with the public. We try and provide robust evidence to support the design of better policy. We're doing this by supporting good research, by ensuring we have the best data possible, by proactively reaching as many people as possible, and by ensuring they have their voices heard in climate policy. And the programmes I have mentioned, the NDCA, the Just Transition Commission, the Energy Affordability Action Plan, and our research strategy, and indeed what we did on the South Coast DMAP, are just some examples of what we are doing to ensure that we support public engagement in the co-design of better policies. So I look forward, unfortunately I can't stay for the rest of the day because I've been called to sub for my minister at a thing in Dublin. He can't attend. I would love to stay and listen to how the new guidelines will help all of us as a community to design better policies and deliver them effectively. But hopefully I've given you some idea of how one civil service department at least is trying to adapt how we go about our business to make sure that we bring all of you with us. Thank you very much.
Mentioned or built environments and these things that influence how we can achieve the goals of reducing the emissions. Transport, housing, health, all are implicated, but it happens in different departments. Can you talk about this question and the collaboration between the departments? Thanks.
So it's an extremely good question. I did mention it's a whole of government approach, but when I sit with my peers around the table, we sit around occasionally, thanks, yeah. They do tend to say kind of over to you, when climate comes up. However, there are structures and systems within government that, first of all, that, if I can say, require government departments to come with us. So sectoral emission ceilings, for example. So other government departments own sectoral emission ceilings in their respective areas. So if you like, they have a kind of a hard task, a hard limit that they have to deal with. Now, that can work, it cannot work. I mean, budget limits exist there as well, but it certainly focuses the mind. But that only gets you so far. So the next piece is around the dialogue, the working across groups and across committees, and bringing people, as I've mentioned, the task force work, for example. So task force work is where we bring largely public sector bodies, although stakeholder involvement happens, say, every second meeting or whatever, and we sit them down and we work through what it is that they own of a problem, and we try and get them to address their part of it in a way that where we're all facing in the same direction. So the task force model, which we really have only started implementing over the last 12 to 18 months, has been extraordinarily effective in getting us further forward and where we are. The one thing I should say, and I'm sure Liz would agree with me, is that in the last 5 years, the knowledge and conversation and commitment to climate adaptation has changed the dial, right? There's no similarity between the conversations we're having today between what we would have had, say, 5 years ago. Climate is an alive issue for every department now, both within their own department and having to meet their own targets around reduction of energy use and so forth, but also more particularly about how as a collective public service or civil service we must work together to deliver it on the ground. Sadly, adaptation events like Storm Éowyn, for example, really then land that message very strongly, because one of the biggest challenges for Ireland is going to be the adaptation challenge, particularly to major weather events. And that's something that really sort of enforces that message and reinforces that need to work together to handle these problems. It is a truism to say that government works in silos, but with regard to this issue, at least we are moving ourselves along the dial a great deal. And it is certainly better than it was. We could always, we keep working at it. One of the issues we're working on at the moment is to try and streamline our networks of meetings and introduce better governance around them, because as is typical in any large bureaucracy, we had ended up with loads of working groups and loads of this and that and the other, So one of the things we're doing under the current programme of government is just to restructure the governance around that, working then ultimately into a Climate Action Delivery Board and on into a Cabinet subcommittee and into the main Cabinet. So that allows us to keep a better structure, a better control over and make sure that every task force is actually working, that they are actually meeting, that they are actually doing their job as well. So that's important also. No worries.
Thanks. One more question maybe? Over here.
Hi, Oonagh. That was really informative. My name is Katrina Fitzgerald. I'm from Research and Evaluation at the Department of Justice. And just really curious about the lessons learned from your team with developing the DMAP on the South Coast. So they came back to you and they said they'd like to do this on a national scale. Could you give us an insight into those lessons learned? So maybe we won't recreate the same thing ourselves.
Yeah. Well, my former home, obviously we did a lot of work on consultation. We were doing the family justice strategy, including talking to children who'd been through the family justice. It was the first time I think the Department of Justice had ever done that, so it was really quite innovative. Yeah, and it took a lot of work, I say was the headline, right? That you need resources and you need people and you need commitment. And that we can't, we were contemplating doing a series of DMAPs. So we were now going to do one on the East Coast, then we're going to do one on the West Coast, and we were going to do one on the Southwest Coast, and all that good stuff. That was also going to involve a lot of political lobbying to us to prioritise one area over another area, particularly the West over the East Coast. It would inevitably lead to real problems around staggering them, because in essence you're preparing for one consultation on a DMAP, you're in the middle of one consultation on a DMAP, and you're kind of finishing, and that was the way they were going to have to be sequenced, and the resource level that would take was very strong. So when the team sat down and kind of brainstormed this, they said, well, actually there may be a way we can kind of cut this Gordian knot of doing a single offshore wind DMAP, and how it is done is that you first identify the likely target areas, and then you go in and intensively consult on them, and that's actually what happened with the South Coast DMAP. So it means that you first do your data collection, you identify where the likely places are that are going to be suitable for that first round of offshore wind farms, and we're talking here about wind farms out to 2040, so it's a good long way away. And then you then know which communities you're going to have to consult in, but you start to do that consultation in a very bespoke way, in a very targeted way. I have to say, I'll be honest, I was quite sceptical when they floated this idea to me, and I said, really lads, can you do it? Lads and ladies. But they convinced me that the alternative of that staggered approach was actually going to be worse in terms of resource need, and that what it would do would be to give some clarity to communities at a much earlier stage in that process, and then we could do that deep dive consultation with each community. I should say that since the DMAP, the first DMAP was done, which was done on kind of a bespoke where we literally pulled people in from other bits of the department and put them onto the team and then broke the team up again. We're now have an established team because I've acquired maritime planning as part of my department since. So we will have an established DMAP team who will be able to do that consultation in a more targeted way and learning the lessons from, you know, what inevitably went wrong the first time round. But they know more what they're doing now. So anyway, they expressed great confidence that they could do this. And as a consequence, we convinced the minister, and as a consequence, he convinced the government. So let's hope they're right.
Thank you so much again. Thanks to Oonagh for a really inspiring talk.